Hi, and welcome to the Pathways to Stillness podcast series. I'm Dr. Gary Irwin-Kenyon. I'm a gerontologist and a Tai Chi teacher. I decided to create this series after receiving many heartfelt responses to my book, Pathways to Stillness, Reflect, Release, Renew, which is available on Amazon, Indigo, and Friesen Press, and in audiobook form from Audible and iTunes. You're also invited to check out my website at pathwaystostillness.org. As with my book, this podcast invites you to a conversation about how it's possible to discover your own pathways to meaning, peace, and stillness, even during these times of heightened anxiety, confusion, and rapid change. We are helped on our own journey to stillness by listening to the wisdom in each other's stories. Chapter 6 in my book is titled Finding Your Way. It gives you guidelines for your exploration, as well as examples of those who have discovered meaning and stillness in their lives. In this series of episodes, I have the great pleasure to speak with two close colleagues and friends, Dr. Albert Banerjee, who's our guest, and Dr. Bill Randall, who will act as co-host today. Albert is Chair of Community Health and Aging and a professor in the Gerontology Department at St. Thomas University in Fredericton. Bill is, I understand, soon to be appointed Professor Emeritus after a long and distinguished career in gerontology at St. Thomas University. Bill has just published a very interesting new book entitled Fairy Tale Wisdom, Stories for the Second Half of Life. In this episode, we're in conversation with Albert to talk about the culture of doing versus being. That's one of the themes that you'll find if you go back through our various podcasts with Bill Cook, with myself, with Bill Randall, with Thomas Moore. We've interviewed all those folks, and that's a major distinction between the notion of doing, which is, again, like a denial of death, is a very common perspective of mastery, of controlling, being able to do things, as opposed to acceptance, letting go, which life sometimes forces on us, letting go and just being, another dimension of who we are as human being, as opposed to human doings. I'm very interested in what you've talked a little bit about with me about yoga, and kind of, I think I'm getting at it right, the kind of yoga and spiritual practices sometimes being co-opted and losing their authenticity. Can you say something about that?
Yeah. And this is sort of where I think I'm increasingly interested in the worldview of Western medicine, that kind of control. Lorraine Coates, she's a feminist philosopher, ecological philosopher, and she writes of the social imaginary of mastery, which is sort of this vision of ourselves in control of the world, trying to dominate the world, out of which, Western biomedicine emerges. And that is kind of a background orientation. So when alternatives come into view, we tend to see them through that light. So, mindfulness and meditation becomes a form of stress reduction. These monks weren't stressed out 2,000 years ago going into the forest trying to calm their anxiety. Or yoga becomes, there's a recent study that, came out of Harvard, very excitedly talking about how yoga can help us deal with frailty, to avoid frailty. Again, yoga is a system designed to help us live well in an impermanent world. That it might prevent or delay frailty is a useful side effect, but it's not the point. So we just can't help ourselves, when we engage with these practices, but bend and twist them to our worldview rather than have them sort of challenge our worldview.
Right? Could you say they become kind of co-opted into the doing mode of our human beings, human doing, where they were designed for a human being,
Yes.
the being mode.
Yeah, exactly. They get co-opted, turned into. I mean, I had to laugh. At the end of this study, they said now we need to we know that yoga works to prevent frailty and manage anxiety, and that now we need to figure out the correct dosage. Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's laughable, right? It's laughable that we're thinking about the dosage of yoga.
Can you say more, Albert, about how yoga, is a significantly different worldview overall about life, the universe, and everything? So when we're inviting people to shift from an instrumental approach to yoga to a philosophical embracing of, say, yoga, uh, we're asking people at the level of the profession of healthcare and at the level of individuals to, as Gary and I might say, radically restory the narrative by which they live and function. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think there's many differences between the yogic worldview and sort of our contemporary sort of consumer oriented, worldview of doing, as you put it so well, Gary. We tend to, the dominant culture here in North America is one of doing, that you are your accomplishments, you are what you own, and that these external goods or relationships will be where you will find satisfaction, these external accomplishments. Yoga asks us to pay attention, as you pointed out, Gary, to being. Yoga also brings to light impermanence. That's a central understanding of the world within yoga, that the world is change, coming and going. And so if your orientation to the world is to hold on to things and keep them as they are, you're going to suffer. So part of the reason, this, if you're engaged with yoga or these contemplative traditions, they talk about presence, about being with. That is a response. That's a way of being in the face of change, right? If you're with a partner and a romantic partner and you want to keep him or her the same throughout your relationship, it's not going to last very long, or you're going to be very unhappy, or he's going to be very unhappy. But if you cultivate a way of being present with one another where you are, where they are, then you're going to be able to move through these changes as they come. So the valuation of presence or stillness, which is a word, Gary, that you use, and I really love that, cultivating that way of being in the world is a way of responding to impermanence. It's not a tool to manage stress.
One of the challenges of what we're talking about, I find, is to have someone embrace this being mode. They, as you're saying, they need to let go. They need to drop their whatever thoughts they have about being, because it's really something in its own right. It's accessible, but it's not accessible in a controlled and conscious way. You have to let go and accept in order for the benefit to happen. So, as you say, the dominant mode of doing is doing in our culture. So it makes it difficult for people who aren't brought to, well, I say they aren't brought to stillness by intense suffering, for example. As you say, they have attachments to things that are so great that they can't let go, but are kind of forced to by life, which can turn out to be a gift instead of a terrible thing. But it does take some sort of internal transition to being able to let go, because you can't think and make something happen to automatically get it.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. Richard Rohr has this concept of necessary suffering, He has a lovely book called Falling Upwards, and the idea is, you encounter this necessary suffering. It could be a divorce, could be loss of a job, could be an illness or a disability or an accident, and you fall, but if you're able to, with skills and resource and work, you can actually, as you say, get something out of it, begin to expand your understanding of yourself and what matters to you, right? So I do think that suffering ends up being really important. I tried to teach this in a course on contemplative aging to students here at St. Thomas, and I think on the whole the course went well, but initially it was challenging because students who are 17, 18, 19, 20 have bought in hard to doing, and they are in the midst of doing, and they're doing so much, and they might be stressed, they might be anxious, but they haven't yet tied that to their approach to living. I think they probably need another 5 or 10 years to start to see the consequences of that approach to life. Or, then you start to get the things you think you wanted and you realize you're still not satisfied. And you start to question, well, what exactly am I after? So I think, this is really important to put in the context of aging. I think you do need some experience. You do need some failure to make this manifest.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you for listening to the Pathways to Stillness podcast series. My book, Pathways to Stillness, Reflect, Release, Renew, is available on Amazon, Indigo Chapters, and Friesen Press. It is also available in audiobook form from Audible, Amazon, and iTunes.